I think we're always down for nuts. Always. In and around the mouth. Nuts.
Yeah. Oh,
And acting nutty.
Daniel likes to choke on them. Daniel chokes on them sometimes. We have
Sometimes,
established this.
but then I have like the back, molars that are supposed to chomp them down a little bit. You got to make sure you let it
someone's like,
marinate.
Dan, careful, you're gonna choke, Dan. Like, too many. Slow
you
down.
don't know my reputation. On that note, welcome back to Not a Strong Start, a podcast by filmmakers who talk movies, television, and shove copious amounts of nuts inside our mouths without chewing. I'm your host, Cadbury Cream.
I'm not your host, Los Huevos.
Ay, ay, ay.
Ay, ay, ay.
And I like the peanut butter ones. I don't say I've replayed it all yet. Sorry. I like peanut butter ones.
Says the
For some
peanut butter
reason,
one.
that just made me think of like Anchorman, where everyone's like going. It's just like, I like lamb.
In this week's episode, we're going to talk about fan service and Easter eggs. Are they good? Are they bad for the sake of movies? That's what we'll discuss. But first, we're going to hit them with the current event.
We know since Disney bought Fox and they got all the properties that came with it. Since then, we've seen Prey come out for Predator. We do know there is an Alien project that's in the works. I believe it's supposed to release like next year on Hulu. But what I didn't know, and I found out not too long ago, is that one of the old directors of content from Fox revealed that there was actually an Alien versus Predator animated series that was completed, and Disney has stuck it in a vault and has not even said a word about it. So this Alien versus Predator series that supposedly has some promise to it has just been shoved into the Disney vault, and we're probably never going to see it. What are you guys' thoughts?
So similar to the nuts that are being shoved into mouths, that's where this one went into.
Yeah, it's in there,
Um,
nice and deep in the
Nice and
vault.
deep, man. Um, I, I, they haven't quite gotten Alien versus Predator right yet. I know Marie's gonna bite my head off saying how much fun they are. They're okay. But they haven't quite gotten it right. So to see an animated version of that, that's weird to me. I never imagined seeing an animated xenomorph. So unless they're gonna make it all cute, friendly, and like a little like a Muppet Babies version of it, then I don't really need to see it. I'd rather just get the R-rated, like show me blood, show me violence, show me gore. Can't get that
I
in
mean,
animation like that.
there's R-rated animated movies. I mean, DC themselves have them with a lot of
Yeah.
blood and
No,
violence.
they can. It's gonna be weird to see that in a xenomorph form. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just because there's something so beautiful to look at when you see it on camera, like the shine off of it. You're not gonna quite get that with animation. Obviously, animation could go very extreme and very R-rated. I'm not saying that it can't be, but if they haven't quite been able to do that with live action, why are they gonna be able to do it in animation?
I thought you were going to say there's like another movie coming out, which I would have been like, I was getting excited for because I like to see that in like a darker way. But an animated one, yeah, no. I can see maybe if it was like some like a dark like Castlevania type style, almost type cartoon, but I still those are two things I kind of don't want to see animated, Alien or Predator. I think they need to be like a tangible object, like not even CG, just or yes, to capture their true essence and how scary they both are. I'm okay not seeing an animated show of it. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Keep it in the vault. Shove it down the throat, or whatever you guys said.
Yeah, I don't really care about it. I'm a huge fan of both IPs, but I like what they did with Prey, and I'm hoping they keep a similar format or a similar formula of pretty much reviving and going back to what made the original what it was. That they do the same thing with Alien uh, in there. So keep going in that direction. No distractions with anything extra on anime, and then build up towards. I would love to see another AVP. There's plenty of story material you can do, and so many possibilities with that. Work your way to it with the current projects that you're doing. Just leave that with Batgirl. Fine.
Let's get into our main one. So when we talk about fan service, right? When we talk about movies that do Easter eggs, but there's even a term fan service. What does fan service mean to you guys?
Things that they put into these projects, into these movies that are, they're purposely put in there for the fans of the property of the IP or fans of the previous installments. They're kind of that wink, wink, nudge, nudge that they put in there. Something that someone who's has no connection with whatever the IP is or the previous installment might completely miss it. But someone who knows it and is a fan, they're gonna catch it. That's the way I look at fan service.
Same. You can always tell too with the filmmakers if they're true fans of like if they're doing like a sequel or a prequel or a continuation or anything like that. You can tell if they're like true fans of the original content and if they're like really passionate about it, as opposed to if they're just building on this franchise to like make money and stuff and like throw like, oh, I know this is in this movie, let's throw that in there. Oh, I know these characters are in it, like let's just throw that. You can really feel when there's a big difference between the two. I've felt in movies, which we will talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of that stuff. It's like a little inside joke sometimes that they'll kind of have, but sometimes, there's such rabid fan bases for a lot of these franchises. It's kind of tools that directors, filmmakers will use to kind of let them know, hey, we're part of this hidden club. Like we read the comics too. So the more that they put in, sometimes it feels like sometimes it shows more of their fandom, but sometimes it can also feel like they're over accommodating if they stuff too much in there. And now it's not necessarily original anymore. Now you're just kind of jamming them down the throat of the viewers.
So much jamming.
Everyone's jamming, man. It
Let's
all
keep it
started with
going.
rock. It started with rock music, and now here we are. Just jamming Easter eggs. So, what makes Easter eggs great for fans? For you guys, like in what instances could it be good?
With Easter eggs, I feel first of all, it shows like a respect and appreciation for fan dedication, for fan attention to detail, and for the time that they've put into whatever that property is. I think it also, it provides watchability for certain movies because it's kind of like a treasure hunt. So, you watch it, they have all these Easter eggs, and
Mm.
you got to rewatch it to catch something else, and then you catch another thing, and it increases the value of a movie over time if done right. So I think like that's what makes Easter eggs great for fan, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it just makes like a whole franchise feel like cohesive and like part of a whole pretty much because when you have like little tidbits thrown in, it gives you that like feeling of the like original movie or like the whole franchise has that feeling.
I like it because it also kind of gives like an homage somewhat to like the filmmaker. So they'll include stuff that is not necessarily part of the franchise. They'll just give some stuff that they were influenced by other
Mhm.
movies, and you see that come out. So it could either be certain sound scores, it could be certain visuals, which you'll see. It'll be stuff in the background, it'll be certain actors even that's casted. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And like they'll do things that way with it because they were in something else. And it's kind of cool because it really brings you to mind movies in general that it kind of makes it where you're not taking it so seriously, and there's something that's fun about movies and film. And when you get Easter eggs, it feels like sometimes we, the audience, are part of the fun, and we're part of what the director's trying to give us as well.
You ever find yourself in the theater or even like watching at home, you're watching with other people, one of those Easter egg pops up and you're just like, huh? Huh? You
Yeah.
Yeah.
see that? You see that? You catch
Yes.
it?
Oh yeah. And you turn around and then like, sometimes when nobody gets it, it's like, man, what the hell? Damn it!
Damn it.
I brought the
Then
wrong
you
person to this movie.
then you gotta explain. It's like you see, no, they did that because of this, and that
Yeah.
references this, references that,
Yeah.
and they're looking at you like you just made me miss the last 30
Yeah.
seconds of what they were saying.
And you got somebody behind you, shut up, you stupid nerd. And you're like, man, come on. But that was funny, guys. That was
Yeah.
clever.
So
Yes,
if
I
you don't
know.
get it, you don't deserve to be here. Get out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Get out of here, you Cadbury cream.
This was made for me and only me.
Exactly. Yes. Only me. Only me. Yes. So what are some of the good Easter eggs you guys have caught? I'm sure we all have like a huge list of these, and these go huge. So let's hit them with some examples. Marie, you're excited? You start us off.
Yeah. My number one that I thought of was how in Rogue One they used the stock footage of Red Leader and Gold Leader from A New Hope and put it in there. That I teared up instantly. That twinge in my heart. I thought that was genius, and what a good way to like tie in the prequel to the original movie and using the not using new actors to portray these characters, but stock footage they didn't use
Yes.
in New Hope.
Yes.
One that I have here, because sometimes I look at Easter egg also sometimes, like you mentioned, Dan, uh, they might not reference something from the past, but they can sometimes be a little thing they put in there to kind of tell you where the story is going or something like that, something that you might not catch immediately. And I think one of my favorite ones is actually in The Exorcist that I thought was really well done. And this is where for like and they did it at different moments depending if you saw like the digital, the theatrical and stuff. But you get Pazuzu show up for like an eighth of a second, just show up in frame really quick. So easy to like miss that, it was meant to kind of affect your subconscious in a way where maybe you don't notice that you saw it, but your subconscious kind of grabbed onto it, and you get this feeling of uneasiness. That was the purpose of it, and I feel that's great for a horror movie. You don't always have to put everything in the forefront, like, "Hey, look at this." So
Mhm.
throwing little things like that, that if you catch it, and like Hill House, The Haunting at Hill House did that a lot, where you would catch things all the way in the background and
Hmm.
stuff. So this, the way they actually said this I thought was great. It was genius, and I still love it to this day.
Yeah. It reminded me of a Fight Club. Remember how you would see Tyler Durden pop in for like a frame or two when you could tell it started bleeding into his consciousness. So they did something similar. Yeah, I love that. One that I had though, this is where I was referencing about a project that's not necessarily connected to the IP, but in the movie Toy Story, one that I freaking loved was Sid's room. His carpet was an Overlook Hotel. As Marie has right there in her
Awesome.
pillow. When you go
Oh,
back and rewatch it, that's what his carpet looks like. So it kind of gave you that really
Awesome.
gloomy, intense, dark image, and that's what told me the filmmakers clearly Shining fans. And they threw it in there. I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, when I saw it, because I recognized it right away. And of
did
course,
it?
Sid would be like that.
Yeah, did it match the drapes?
Oh, it matched the tracer. That and the pubes.
Uh, that's
Straight for it.
actually really cool because it's such a different type of movie. Like to throw that
Mhm.
in that this Toy Story is meant to be for a kids movie, so you know that Easter egg is for the adults that are going with their kids to watch it. So that I like when they do that. Shrek used to do that quite a bit, throw in little
Hmm.
Easter eggs for the adults watching.
This is the same type of thing that Daniel just said, where it's not in the same like movie franchise at all. But I've talked about this a lot lately, and it goes with fan service and also an Easter egg. So in Halloween H2O, and they
Shocker.
have Janet Leigh, shocker, Janet Leigh, Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, Janet Leigh in Psycho, and Janet Leigh has she drives the original car that she drives in Psycho in Halloween H2O. And had the same license plate and everything. And then they also throw a little bit of the score in there. And I thought that was beautiful, tying those together. And I appreciated it even more when I watched Psycho for the first time, like this year.
It was really cool, and especially when they give shout outs and homages to like horror films that came before it, and you can see it was a direct influence.
Mhm.
So Psycho, you could tell Halloween had a huge influence with, from Psycho. So it's cool the fact that they brought it in. Awesome.
Yeah, which actually I didn't catch that actually until I saw Marie's episode
Hmm.
on H2O. That's why I thought a couple of those things when you mentioned like the music and all of that.
Hmm.
Uh, so tune into that episode if you haven't and find like all the little Easter eggs that they mention in that.
Hmm.
There's a lot, and a lot we didn't mention.
Well, I feel that I have to mention this movie because there was so many Easter eggs in this one. I remember like rewatching it and just looking for little things because this whole movie as a whole was like a homage to horror in general. And that's Cabin in the Woods. There
Hmm.
was so many
Hmm.
references, so many movies. Uh, I'm not gonna mention all of them. I'll mention one of the main ones is the whiteboard that they had with all the creatures in there, and you can pretty much free frame that and go through and find like a different type of creature or enemy from pretty much any type of horror movie you can think of is there. Like they even have what was the name of it? I think it was like Angry Molesting Tree. What is that from? So they had it was just twins. We were just speaking about The Shining.
Mhm.
So I like rewatching that movie, and I always feel like I always catch a new thing in there, whether it's on the whiteboard or when they're looking at the storage cubes with all the where all the enemies are there. And it was like, oh, I didn't see that enemy before. So that movie had a lot of Easter eggs, but I feel it felt right for that movie and it fit without taking away from it.
Yeah.
That movie's just like a whole horror movie cliche. So throwing all of the Easter eggs in, it just suits it. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, you did. And it reminded me a little bit of a 13 Ghosts. Remember how they had them like in the
Yeah.
little glass cases? Like you saw that as well.
Yeah.
Here's
Hmm.
one that's awesome that I don't think a lot of people know about. In the movie Fight Club, there's a Starbucks cup in every scene of the entire movie. It could be there in somebody's hand, it could be there on a desk in the background, or it could be there on the ground that's scattered. It's in every single scene of the entire movie because it's based off of a book and is based off the idea behind it is consumerism. How people are
Ah,
obsessed with consumerism. And what's the king of all that? Starbucks. So they're able to get licensed from Starbucks and use them, and they ran wild with it. So
wow.
yeah. So Fincher just went ham on it and just threw in Starbucks on every single scene. It's a nice
Oh,
Easter
so
egg.
that means Game of Thrones producer must have consulted with Fincher when they started putting Starbucks cups in their scenes.
Clearly. Exactly.
It was intentional. It was
It
intentional.
was all
Yeah,
intentional.
yeah.
Yes.
It
It was
was it
just an
was all a
homage.
message about consumerism in Game of
I was
Exactly.
just
Thrones.
gonna say it, yeah.
Despite the fact that they're creating consumerism with Game of Thrones that we just consume the hell
Yeah.
of, and there we are buying a 12 pack of socks for Christmas.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one. I'm gonna be on the lookout. I'm gonna be looking for every Starbucks cup next time I watch it now.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch it too now. Speaking of molesting trees, I another movie that has tons of Easter eggs too that are thrown in so subtly or just so they kind of take some Easter eggs and they make it their own. Like it'll be like, oh, there's boiling water in this movie in this scene, but let's take the boiling water and put it in a different way in this scene in this movie. That's not my Easter egg I'm talking about though, that I want to talk about. But I mean, the tree scene isn't an Easter egg, but it's I'm glad they kept that in it. It felt right to me. I don't know. That's all I meant. I'm just glad they put that in. But the Easter egg that I
Oh,
like
that's staying in.
is
That's staying
no,
in.
can you not please like everything that's embarrassing, you're just gonna keep God. No. What I like is in the beginning, Mia is sitting on the same car that Ash drives in Evil Dead 1 and in Evil Dead 2. And she's also wearing a Michigan sweater, which Sam Raimi when that's where he's from Michigan. And then also in Evil Dead 1, Linda is wearing a Michigan sweater. And it's basically like it's an ongoing joke for like Sam Raimi to have all this Michigan stuff put in like I think all of his movies. So I love that. I love seeing that. And that's why I bought my Michigan sweater. I have one just because of that movie. Never been to Michigan.
Wait, are you referring to that like it's not like
I should have wore it.
that mustard car?
Yes. I'm really
Yeah.
pissed at myself that I didn't wear that friggin' sweater. I'm like, what should I wear? Oh, Star Wars nostalgic. And I'm like, oh, I had that sweater right there, but I guess I was sweaty recording. I didn't want to wear one. Damn.
Well,
And it's
because
summertime.
that car was actually gonna that was my next one. Because on
Oh.
top of Evil Dead, Sam Raimi has included that car and other things, included like the
Mhm,
Spider-Man 2. It was in there in Drag Me to Hell. It was in
mhm.
there. It's what's that Oldsmobile Delta 88 or something or 89, one of those.
Yeah, he uses it in all of his movies. Yeah.
I like that because it was like a regular person who just, let's say, just catches a random Sam Raimi
Mhm,
movie. They're not even going to look twice at the car. But anyone who's watched his
mhm,
movie is like, that looks familiar.
Here's one that I have, which I always love Tarantino movies. He had a couple
mhm.
Big Kahuna Burger, which is used in several movies, and then the Red Apple cigarettes. I love so that's the cigarette brand he uses in all of his movies. But it's a nice little thing. You actually hear people calling out for it when they order it. You see them with the same pack, and they even did it in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. At the very end, the post credit scene, you see Leonardo DiCaprio's ad for it. So loved it.
think Tarantino is like one, if someone asked me like which director basically has its own universe, to me it's like
Oh
Tarantino.
yeah.
I think of all of his movies in this one universe and it's contained and it's only his and he so that him putting things like that in all of his movies, they feel so connected. Like they all belong in the same comic book or they all belong in the same thing. Like they should do they sell like box sets of like all of his movies in one because they all need to be together because I feel like there's
Yeah.
it's just such their own precious thing. All Tarantino movies.
It does. And there was an interesting thing that he's talked about where he says some of his movies are movies and some of them are real life and they're part of the same connected world. So, for instance, Kill
Mm.
Bill is a movie in his fictional world, but then something like Pulp Fiction would be his real life. One thing I noticed is when I was watching Jackie Brown the other day, I noticed how there's not a true soundtrack to the movie. It's what the characters are listening to. So they'll crank up the stereo and the music soundtrack that we're hearing is what the characters are hearing. But then you have movies like, Inglorious Bastards, or you'll have some like Django, where then it's a traditional soundtrack where they'll play it and the person's not playing it themselves. That made me start wondering if that's where the distinction comes into play. So when you have the movie with the traditional
Ooh.
soundtrack, that could be the fake movies within his world. And then you would think, oh, that'd be Kill Bill, it'd be Inglorious, it'd be Django,
Yeah.
the more older movies. But then the ones like Jackie Brown, Pulp Fiction are his real world ones.
See, and that's just interesting.
Yeah.
I like when they do that, but they don't outright say it because they
Exactly.
know
Mm-hmm.
the fans themselves, they're gonna catch these things, they're gonna look into it, they're gonna, you know, kind of piece everything together that you don't need to say it. Because if you need to say it, those are not your real, like dedicated diehard fans.
Yeah.
Um, and it's kind of you remind me you mentioned Marie about the like shared universe within like all the movies, and I feel like that's kind of like what the Pixar is, and they have little Easter
Mm-hmm.
eggs throughout their movies that people have gone in and combed through all the movies and basically pieced everything and connected every movie together, one way or another, where they also supposedly have their own shared universe, just like that, but
Mm-hmm.
they don't say it out loud, just like Tarantino doesn't
Mm-hmm.
say it out loud.
I love that. And that's when you know it's true Easter eggs because the
Yeah.
idea behind it, they'll have shout outs, right? Like a filmmaker will give shout outs where they'll give like a certain nod to the camera and most of the audience should be catching what that means. But then sometimes when they do true Easter eggs like that, it's almost like it doesn't matter whether the people actually catch it or not. It's more of the director themselves that are kind of giving themselves like a little wink, like, oh, I throw this in there, I threw that in there. And if you're a true
Mm-hmm.
fan or a fan of whatever it is, you're going to be able to catch some of those things. And that's when I kind of feel like you feel smart.
I would say I do respect that when they do that because especially nowadays, where any little thing like this was a hit, we're gonna make a shared universe. This was
Yeah.
a hit, we're gonna make a shared universe. Like right off the bat,
Yeah.
the movie is out for one day, and they're already talking about we're gonna do a shared universe. Overall,
Yeah.
even Mattel's getting a shared universe, as we like talked before. So I
Mhm.
respect the subtleness like to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they'll have like a one of the big Easter eggs was in Indiana Jones, right? When Indy falls in Raiders of the Lost Ark and he falls down and he's in the snake pit and he sees, there's like a bunch of the hieroglyphs or whatever that's carved into the walls. And then you see C3PO and R2D2 back there.
Yeah.
It's a nice little shout out because that's something that's not an obvious shout out that the normal person is going to catch. It's something that you really have to pause. You really have to look. And we didn't find out about this till like decades later. Like I didn't know that existed. And then when they
Mm.
had the Star Wars prequels and you see ET there at the
Yeah.
council, it's sort of like George Lucas giving a shout out back just to Spielberg. So that's when I say sometimes they'll throw in Easter eggs that it feels like it's just directors giving their own little jokes. And it's not
Mhm.
necessarily intended for the audience. It's intended for somebody else. I
You
enjoy that.
didn't get it, it wasn't meant for you.
Exactly. It wasn't meant for you then. But I just think that's awesome. And that's why it kind of breaks a little bit where we can sit here and watch these movies or these films and know that the directors are taking these so seriously. But sometimes it is just fanfare. Sometimes it's intended to just have fun and it is just consumerism. And that's okay sometimes. So they'll kind of give you these little shout outs or these Easter eggs, which is pretty cool.
But I just want to say first, Daniel, that
Mhm.
observation about the Tarantino movies just like blew my mind and it was brilliant. So
I just saw it. Thank you. I just saw it. Jackie Brown. I was just mentioning that. And all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute. And then what movie was it? I went back to, I think it was Pulp Fiction. I realized, dude, this is a theme. Like there was only
Mm.
one movie that then like there's only two moments in the entire movie where there's a soundtrack song that comes on, but like that's it. The rest of it's just all based off of the characters playing. It's just really weird, very strange.
Was it
Just
weird?
yeah.
I think you connected the dots
Maybe,
there. You're
yeah,
smart.
yeah.
Did you feel smart? You should have felt smart.
Just sometimes, sometimes.
It's like the foresight to put that together for over that
Yeah.
length of time. That's great.
The last one I have is just for fun, fan service, Easter eggs, and that is like the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Like that entire movie, there's an Easter egg and fan service in every single scene. From the very beginning, they have the punch out characters hanging on pictures in the pizzeria. They have the laughing dog from Duck Hunt portrait in that rich people's house where they're going to fix the sink. Luigi's cell phone ring is the GameCube startup sound. Like the little tiny attention to detail that they had in this, when they start going through that construction zone and it's a side scrolling thing and it's like resembles like the first stage in the first Mario game, that's when the tears started and they did not stop the entire time.
Mm.
That movie is full of it, and oh, we'll talk about why it's so, I think this like fan service and all that is so good. But and also, come on now, you're gonna put the piano as Ludwig von Koopa. That is just brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, like that is just so good. My heart. That was my last one. I just loved it.
No, it did. And then we've even seen some Easter eggs with appearances, where uh the big one was Hitchcock was one of the first ones where he popped in like 39 of his 52 movies. Like he's in the background somewhere to
Nice.
some
Yeah.
extent. Love it. So
Stanley.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But I did read, so there's a theory about how they came up with the term Easter egg, right? Because a lot of
Mm.
people associate it with like Atari, when they're developing a video game, it's like the little you scroll past a certain part of a level and you go into like a hidden part that the creators developed. Another one that I heard was on the Rocky Horror Picture Show, where the director, I guess, before they started filming, they'd do like they'd hide Easter eggs for the cast to find, and
Hmm.
some of them were just hidden very well. When you watch the movie, you can catch literal eggs in the shots sometimes hidden on set.
Mm.
So
Wow.
who's to say
That's
where
cool.
it exactly came from? I mean, probably Atari, maybe. I don't know, but it could have been Rocky Horror Picture Show, and that one had literal eggs. So who knows? Pretty cool though.
That is
If I
really
had to
cool.
pick one, I would want to go with the Rocky Horror. I feel
I do.
like that's a
I
better
100%
story.
want that. Yeah, because the other one's
Yeah.
just like a hidden level, but it's not necessarily associated with an like egg of any sort.
Yeah.
This one was
Mhm.
Easter egg hunt. So
Yeah, I mean, like metaphorically, you just be like, well, you need to hunt and go on the hunt for Easter eggs, and they're hidden, so that's why we call them Easter eggs. But having it a little literal Easter egg, I like that.
yeah, I do too.
Now we talked about, Easter eggs and how they're used and all of that. And sometimes they could be used for nostalgia reason, but to kind of
Mhm.
focus strictly on nostalgia, there's always that debate, and I've heard people talking about it. Nostalgia in movies, is it good to have or is it bait?
It depends, and it really depends on, just like it is with most things. When you do jump scares, it's typically bad. When you do especially how they've been using it now for this kind of stuff, it tends to be bad because it's not done creatively. So as long as you're creative on how you do it, like the way that the Super Mario Brothers did it, that was creative, and you had a nice callback. It's something that we don't get a ton of Super Mario Brothers material anyways, so it doesn't feel
Yeah.
like you're just overusing it. When we've seen a lot of like Star Wars, it felt like they kept doing it too much to the point where if you're doing something that's a project that's maybe only like 10, 15 years old, it's not a throwback anymore. Like it's still in recent memory. So it
Hmm.
really depends on it. There's great examples of it being used, and there's horrible examples of it being used. So it's just like with anything, it's a tool. It really just comes down to the filmmaker, and it really just comes down to the filmmaker, man. Yeah, it's really hard to say. I can't really generalize if it's.
For me, I think it comes down to a balance between nostalgia and originality. Like I
Mhm.
feel you need to balance those two together. Because I feel like if you rely too much on nostalgia, you're not letting the movie live on its own merits. For that, I'd rather just watch the old stuff and stick to the old stuff because you're literally just regurgitating that same stuff. So you need the nostalgia to blend into something original that you can grab onto and keep the focus on that movie itself. Um, but I mean, it can all the good parts about nostalgia is that it can trigger some of those good memories. Seeing it or experience that in your childhood. Like Mario Brothers, like we mentioned. The Mortal Kombat movie, the first one, not a great movie, but those memories it brings back of playing the game, and I feel while not a great movie, they unlike Annihilation, they didn't overdo it with the nostalgia. It was just enough to make you appreciate the movie. So again, it comes down to that. If you're gonna give a lot of nostalgia, have a good story construction so the movie can stand
Mhm.
on its own.
And here's a good example of what you're talking about. The movie Prey. It stood on its own, but then they have
Yeah.
tiny little callbacks, like at the very end when he gives the gun over, and it's the one from Predator 2. It's like you get the nice little callback to it. So, but the movie itself, it didn't necessarily need that. It was just like a nice little like, oh, for those that have seen the franchise, they get it.
Mhm.
It wasn't dependent on it. And I think that's where that case is. The story can't be dependent on that stuff. It's got to
Yes,
stand on its own original merit. It's just a nice little
Mhm.
callback.
exactly. And Marie, I know you're big on nostalgia. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, when you sent the message about this is what it was going to be about, the first thing that popped in my head was a quote from Don Draper from Mad Men. And it is in Greek, nostalgia literally means the pain from an old wound. It's a twinge in your heart, far more powerful than memory alone. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. And every time I watch a movie and I see something from my childhood or something that resonates with me, I'm like, oh, I'm in on it. I feel it. I love to have that pain. I'm notorious for watching the same movies over and over and over again because every time, really? Because every time I see it, I'm a glutton for punishment, man. Like I want to feel that ache and that twinge and that pain like over again. So when I see it done well in movies, it like hurts. It makes me so happy it hurts. I'm just like, oh yes, I know that. I remember that. And you know it too. And now I'm in on it. And we're in on our own little secret here. And I feel though that like have it done well in a movie, the movie as a whole itself has to be like you say, stand on its own and be good in its own ways. Otherwise, I feel like the fan service and the Easter eggs just kind of feel cheap or forced. And that's how I felt with like the new Halloween franchise. I felt like it was just like, oh, let's take all these things and all these people and characters, put them in to get butts in the seats. That's all we care about. It didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel like it was like passionate for the original franchise or project. And I felt like that with Evil Dead Rise as well. It was just like thrown in there and it felt too forced. And you can really feel the difference, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, here's an example of that. Like you're saying, of the bad example was the movie Doctor Sleep. It's the sequel to The
Yeah.
Shining, and it was standing on its own merit, felt completely different. I'm like, how is this a sequel to The Shining? Like, I don't understand. And all of a sudden, they go back to the Overlook Hotel. And now they're just throwing a bunch of, you know, remember this? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? And it was like, yeah, but it didn't feel organic to the story. Like, I know some people loved, the movie Doctor Sleep, but like I had issues with it. It felt forced, like a forced sequel to me at that point. I don't know.
I think one that
I
did it,
agree with that movie.
uh,
Sorry. Felt the same way.
I think one that did it well for me was Ready Player One. You had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of nostalgia in there and
Mm-hmm.
Easter eggs and all of that, but the story itself was compelling enough to keep you involved and
Sure.
it stood on its own. So even if you just switch some of those nostalgia stuff with just random things, I
Mm-hmm.
think the story will still work on
Yeah.
its own. But it felt good to still see all those little
Yeah.
tokens and stuff. Um, I think that was actually the last full book that I read
Mm.
uh, because I loved like the movie like so much.
Yeah, and that movie was built around that. Like that was the premise, was the whole 80s. And do you remember the 80s? And that's different. You're supposed to play into it at that point. You can't set it in the 80s and then not really play around with that.
So it seems like, we feel nostalgia is we're leaning more towards good and less towards bait. It's really only bait if that is the only thing you're depending on and you're counting on to sustain your movie. That's when it's bait. But
Yeah,
if it's you have a good movie with nostalgia is part of it, then it's good to have it in. It
that's
seems
true.
like
And, and I feel like for the most part, a lot of movies have it to some extent, anyways. You have to have callbacks to something. Like for instance, if you're gonna have a rom com that's like a meet cute, well, there you have to play off of certain tropes and off of certain things. So there'll be callback things that we've seen where it's like, oh, it reminds me of this to some extent. So every movie does it to some extent. It's just how dependent is that on you? How much is it where, well, I need to rely on that in order to get the butts in the seats? And how much do I need to rely on that in order to tell this compelling story because I have nothing original to say? Like you got to add new spins and stuff to it. You have to incorporate it in creative ways.
You
And
can
that's what
really
AI can.
feel. Oh, never. They don't
AI
feel
can't do
that
that.
twinge in their heart. They don't
No.
have that. They don't have nostalgia. They're brand spanking new. They don't have no. But no, did that really? I feel like Stranger Things did it so well because it took place
Hmm.
in the 80s and it felt like it was in the 80s. And it's not really Easter eggs, but they they base all their seasons around certain movies, and you're like, oh man, I could tell this is straight from ET, this scene's from ET, but they take it and they make it their own, but you can feel the inspiration. So that's what I like too. It's like when you can feel the inspiration, but they're not like um straight up copying and pasting it.
especially the last season, I felt all the Nightmare on Elm Street
Mhm.
references on that one, and
Yeah.
I was like, oh, and they brought my boy England in there. I was so
Yeah.
excited watching that. It besides the first season because of the references they brought in, uh, it became my favorite season besides the first one.
Mine too. It
Mhm.
mine did too.
Me too.
And like what you were saying, Marie, it's like they'll even use the old school Dorito bags that the the
Hmm.
chip bags the kids are eating out of and the soda cans. But it's not like a let me drink this in front of the camera and make it obvious. It's just subtly in the background just to paint that. And that's what we're talking about is if you're gonna paint this world and it's gonna feel authentic, like it needs to feel like that, which means even the consumerism needs to feel like that. It needs to feel like ET, which is what season one felt like. ET.
Yep. Yep.
That brings me to the next question that I have here. So, do you think the studios or the writers, do you think they're better off writing for the general audience or writing for the diehard fans? We'll start with you on this one, Marie. I saw you had
I,
the little twist in your head, like the gears are turning.
I think if you're gonna take something from like the 80s or 90s and a beloved movie or a franchise, something that, um has like a really high fan base and with really devoted fans, right? So they should write for the diehards because that's who they're aiming it for. At least they should be aiming it for the diehards. And you can feel if you're a diehard of like Star Wars and you go and you watch and you're like, I know you're trying to do something new here, but it's like you don't have that same feeling. Then you're going to lose those original fans that it was dedicated to in the first place. I think. I think it should be for the diehards if you're going to take something precious and treasured and rebuild it or build on it. Should be for the diehards.
What about you, Dan?
Um, I agree to some extent, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate on this because for the most part, your general audience is your main large of people that are gonna come out and watch your project. We've seen me and Jose see all the time on Twitter where you have like the Batman interpretations, right? Of the James Gunn versus the Zack Snyder's and what DC's doing. Meanwhile, you have Christopher Nolan who didn't make a Batman franchise for the diehards. For the most part, made it for the general audience. It didn't seem like he pulled a ton from comic books, and it's one of the most successful Batman trilogies that we have. So I think if you only cater to the diehards, they're gonna find stuff to complain about, period, regardless, because it's not exactly what they had. and then you're going to end up copying things, and you're going to end up going like a little bit of what J.J. Abrams kind of did a little bit with Super 8, where it felt too much like E.T. and you're going a little bit too much Spielberg, where then you feel like a copycat. So it needs to feel authentic, but you still have to incorporate that there's new generations of general audience that have never been exposed to this stuff. And you have to give them their new Star Wars to some extent. You have to be able to provide them new stuff. And I think that's why Indiana Jones has struggled sometimes, because they try pulling from those diehards, and then it's just like it's not quite working anymore. And we want something fresh, we want something new. So you kind of have to incorporate with your general audience. You're still going to get diehards, but diehards are going to bash it no matter what. They're going to bash it no matter what.
Yeah, it's tough because like I can see like both sides of it, like the
Mm.
pros and the cons. So like I think if the IP has a huge fan base, then it could be advantageous to write for the diehards because those are the ones who are going to be in those seats watching. Just off the title of this is
Mm.
coming, and they're going to be there in those seats watching it. And then, you risk you know, isolating those fans by trying to cater to the general audience. You risk turning them off, and these are the ones that they're your ride or dies to the end. So you run that risk. So, but then on the other hand, if you're an IP with a rich history, then you risk not gaining new fans if you
Yes.
strictly cater to the diehards. So you're kind of affecting the longevity of your project because those diehard fans eventually they're gonna get old. They're probably gonna be gone. And if you haven't gained new fans, then you're putting that IP at risk for the future. And also if you strictly cater for the diehards, the project it can't serve as an entry point for new people. How many people would put in the effort to go back and revisit older projects if they can't even get into the new one? So
Hmm.
it's that slippery slope. If I go and I see, let's say I had never seen Halloween, and I see, the last one, and I watch it, I'm like, this is horrible. There's no way I'm gonna go watch all the other Halloweens. This is what this is. So it's that weird balance again. I know it feels like a cop out saying balance, but
It
you
is a cop
need
out.
to keep your fans, but you need to try to bring other people in and generalize it more at times for the longevity of your IP.
Yeah, and I think a good example of that is what Marie said about Super Mario Brothers. That was a perfect example of one that blended it well. That was enough for us to have callbacks, but it was so fresh the kids just ate it up. And there's something
Yeah.
about Mario Brothers that just it won't die. Like there's such a
Timeless.
freshness with the video game. It's timeless. New generation of kids can get in, and they didn't need to play the original part 3 that we play that we freaking loved. Like they don't need to be exposed to all that because the storyline is pretty simple. It's got to say princess,
Yeah.
got to kill Bowser. There's nothing more beyond that. Very simple. So you throw that in there. It could have easily been a Pixar movie that was, wasn't called Mario Brothers, and the kids still probably would have ate it up. And that's where that freshness felt like. It felt fresh to that regard, and you still had the callbacks to it. So good balance.
That that movie itself did it perfectly. And I know you're absolutely right. And I know I've talked a lot of smack about Star Wars, but as an entire franchise, I think they're kind of doing that right in a sense too. Like the prequels came out directed more for like a newer generation, kind of lost the OG peeps for a bit. And
Mhm,
then Rogue One came out and that was more for the original generation. And then
mhm.
Mandalorian came out for a newer generation, but some of the older generation liked it too. And then Andor's for like the newer generation. And they're kind of doing it right, even though there's parts of it that I don't like, because I'm an oldie, but they kind of do it right too. They're giving us like bits, they're trying to give us like bits and pieces for each group. They're trying,
Yeah,
And
or they're
that's
succeeding. I
true
don't know.
because I've talked to people that are the younger generation, and their first Star Wars was the prequels, which I cannot stand, and they
Yeah.
love it, and they can't
No.
stand the OG ones.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in a way, they didn't find a way to consolidate it within one trilogy where you get both on board, but there's a fan base for each of them.
Mm.
They just had to figure out a way to join them in multiple projects.
Yeah, and they're sort of doing what this is where Marvel's now running the same hit, right? Because Marvel was doing a very good job for like a long time, like 20 years. Like it was the same audience that were going back to it. They're now starting to come out with products like what you were saying, Marie, where you have different crowds now that you're attracting, but you're not quite marketing and telling us what project I should be watching. Star Wars is very much dealing with that. Like you said, the prequels, that's not our trilogy. We don't associate with that. That has nothing to do with us. That's enemy territory. That's Burger King versus McDonald's. Like, get that out of my face. But it feels like that. So then you have, when we start bringing in like Andor, well, it's very different than the Obi-Wan show. And then you have Mandalorian, which started off pretty good, but now it feels like it's starting to cater towards the prequel crowd. I need to know what projects are for me. And we keep hearing the label of Star Wars and Marvel. So we're all fooled into thinking it's the same product and it's the same audience that they're giving it to, but it's not anymore. And Marvel's doing that because they have the She-Hulk, which is very different than the ones that watched Avengers. And it's just, they're getting muddled. And it's under the same company because they don't quite know how to market and tell us which one we're in,
I think on top of not marketing it to, or at least like letting people know, is the mistake that the MCU is doing with this is the fact that it's set up in a way where everyone has to watch everything to be able to keep up with the big picture. So they are forcing people, the diehards of this, to watch this, which is not for them, and then the diehards of that to watch this, which isn't for them. So now everyone's unhappy overall.
Since we haven't done it in a while, what's on the queue? What's a movie you recommend that gives you that good callback feelings?
I already mentioned mine. I'm gonna go with Cabin in the Woods. If you're a horror fan and you like nostalgia and Easter eggs done right, watch Cabin in the Woods.
Okay. Right.
I'm gonna say Super Mario Bros. Movie. I just watched it again like a couple days ago, and I just keep catching more, and the nostalgia vibes and aches just keep coming. The tears keep flowing, and they're not gonna stop. Can't stop, won't stop.
Can't stop, won't stop. I'm gonna go Pixar. Which one? Throw a rock and hit one. They are the king when it comes to Easter eggs. Every single movie, what I find is so brilliant about them is that there's Easter eggs of past movies and future movies that we haven't even seen yet, which tells you they already have this stuff mapped out for like decades. They are so good at this kind of stuff. And if you're ever curious about what that is, watch YouTube videos. There's countless YouTube videos that'll break down about all these Easter eggs that they put in there, and you just blows your mind how geniuses people are. But thank you for watching another episode of Not a Strong Start. Please like, comment, subscribe, share on our YouTube channel, Not a Strong Start. You can listen to us anywhere you listen to your podcast. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter, Not a Strong Start. I am your host, Cadbury Cream. You can follow me at King_Sangre.
I am not your host, Los Huevos. And you can find me at This Is Mi Nombre
Los
on
huevos.
Instagram.
I like peanut butter ones. You can follow me at Marie Plays It All on Instagram.
You don't love them? You just like them?
Oh, you know what? I do love them. I do, but hey, nothing's as good as Reese's, right?
Yes.
Good as Reese.
They go hand in hand.
That's nostalgia.
Yeah, there you go.
That was nostalgia for an Easter egg right there. Go watch our drunk episode.